Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sean Airy. I'm a developer at Duke University Libraries. I'm going to talk about our ArcLight implementation. It's live at archives.live.duke.edu, so you can go ahead and check it out while I'm talking. So ArcLight looks a little bit like this. We went live July 1st after a 6-month implementation project. I want to give a huge shout out to everybody at Duke who really helped us make this a reality and get this off the ground, particularly our product owner, Noah Huffman, and my fellow developers, David Chandek-Stark, Michael Dahl, and Corey Lown. So because I'm going first here, I'll give a quick overview of what ArcLight is. Then we'll take a look at Duke's particular implementation of ArcLight. I'll share some information about how it's going now that we've been live for a few months, and then share some information about what to expect if you're interested in implementing ArcLight at your institution. So ArcLight is a Blacklight-based Rails engine for finding aids. So where it differs from, say, a catalog application, archival data has some unique characteristics about it that make it a little bit challenging. It's very deeply hierarchical. You have very deeply nested components, sparsely described. Context is really a difficult concept in archival discovery. And the standard that encodes archival data, EAD, is pretty wild and hard to pin down to develop good applications around. This concept of ArcLight, Stanford is doing just an amazing job of leading the charge on ArcLight, really championing this effort. We've been on the sidelines. We didn't really get into the fray until last fall, 2019. We joined in on a community work cycle along with Princeton and Indiana and Michigan and Stanford. And that went so well. We had a pretty nice time of actually starting our local implementation project in January. We were able to launch this summer. Indiana also launched this summer, and Princeton is hopefully going to be launching soon. So all good momentum around the ArcLight project. There are several example ArcLights in production. You can check these out from my slides. I've linked to them. They are live. So let's look at what we've got at Duke for ArcLight. So as I mentioned, a 6-month project. ArcLight is definitely not a turnkey solution. So if you're going to implement ArcLight, your development team is going to have a bit of work to do to get it to work with your particular data for your institution's needs. I want to highlight areas where we took the core software and we changed things about it for our implementation. So the homepage starts off pretty blank. We created a homepage that's hopefully a little more attractive and highlights some featured items from the collections. ArcLight search results by default presents this atomized flat list of components and collections with the, you can see the breadcrumb trail contextualizes each one of these. We switched this around and we made this group by collection by default. So what you see is the collection and then the top 3 hits within those collections underneath. We also really customized the collection landing pages. So the core software has a pretty tab-centric view of a collection. We were a little concerned about the usability of putting the contents and the access restriction behind tabs. So we really kind of exploded this out a bit and made our own layout. We put a sticky sidebar with the context on the left, and we took a little bit of the access restriction information, put a taste of it over on the right-hand side so it wouldn't be missed. We also really customized the component view. So similarly, the component view, you're getting the current context for where you are in the finding aid. Over on the left-hand side, we put a section that's going to display a list of child components for any particular component in the main body of the finding aid display as well. And then anything that has restrictions, we changed some of the rules around inheritance for access and use restrictions and made some kind of brighter call outs to restricted components in the UI. We also have university archives finding aids that have a particular classification system around the collection numbers, where we have nested record groups and subgroups. We implemented a configurable YAML file that we can describe these particular groups. We were able to use the really magnificent Blacklight hierarchy plugin to have a hierarchical facet for browsing this information. It's been really nice. COVID hit right in the middle of our implementation project. It was certainly a big curveball. It also kind of made us rethink what we were doing with ArcLight. It made us think about how can we make our ArcLight interface accommodate a predominantly remote researcher base. And so we took a lot of steps to make sure we made clear ways to use the interface to browse things that you could only access online. We also used ArcLight to help evolve some of our workflows around digitization. Something that happened in COVID was we had a huge spike in demand for digitization of archival materials for remote research, remote instruction. We were able to use the ArcLight bookmarks feature, extend that a bit to develop a CSV export that essentially becomes a work order for a digital production center. This information then carries through into a Duke Digital Repository metadata ingest, and it's really sped things up and helped us to keep pace with the changes that COVID brought on. So speaking of digital repository, we integrate both ways between our finding aids and our digital repository. It's important to us within our finding aids to display inline digital objects. So you can see we've got an inline image viewer, IIIF, OpenSeaDragon viewer. We also have inline audio, we have inline video. This is just really an iframe that's rendering a view from our digital repository application. We're presenting users some links back to the repository view of that item. And then the reverse is true as well. So in the digital repository view of an object, we are using the ArcLight JSON API to pull back in some of the information, this archival context to display in the digital object, and then links back out to ArcLight at the collection level and at the individual component level. We also integrated with our Bento discovery application. So as you do an all search on the library homepage, we are using the ArcLight JSON API to get some search results, and we're presenting some linked breadcrumb trails and icons for online access and restricted items, and link back out to ArcLight there. We did a whole bunch of different custom features in the course of the implementation project that I can't really get into now, but I'm happy to take questions later about them or follow up after this conference. I did want to mention our data pipeline because this is very much changed from what we had, very much improved. What we have now essentially is what's real-time publishing and indexing for our archival data. We had never had anything like this before. We can fully index all of the data in about an hour. This is 4,000 collections and about 1 million components, which really translates to 1 million Solr documents. We're really happy with how this has really sped things up for us. And we also now have EAD data under version control for the first time at Duke. So we've been live for about 100 days. I wanted to share a little bit more about how it's going. So it's going well. Our staff are really happy with it. Our amazing staff at our assessment and user experience department just completed 10 usability tests, remote moderated usability tests over Zoom this past month. A lot of these sort of design and layout changes that we implemented tested really well in these tests. The context navigation on the left and the contents list, all of that people found really helpful. We had created this advanced search modal that pops down that we didn't think would be frequently used, although in the usability tests, most of the users actually hit it at one point or another in their tasks. So everything, we were really pleased with the results here. The biggest thing that we found that was not all that usable was our request workflow, particularly how the container information gets passed through the request process. This is not really and particularly ArcLight specific problem, more to do with kind of just Duke problem. But this was a pretty representative quote from the usability test, from one of the usability test participants, that the interface design does a pretty good job and it funnels me to what I need to see. Most of the things I was looking for were in the first place or two that I suspect that they would be. So we're really happy with how that turned out. We implemented really granular event tracking using Google Analytics to get a sense of what parts of the interface are used frequently. That context nav sidebar is like the hottest part of the interface. It's really all the action is there. The contents list is also popular. Subject and collection facets are used. We can dig in further if you have particular questions about the analytics so far. We also were able to use, this is something we were kind of sweating as we were doing our implementation project, but creating a sitemap. Jack Reed and some other folks created this amazing new Blacklight gem for Dynamics sitemaps that we were able to just plug right into ArcLight and work beautifully. We've got 94% of our collections indexed in the first month being live. The components, because they're not listed in the sitemap, are getting indexed, but pretty slowly. So we might look at how to improve that to make sure that each of the component URLs is also indexed by Google. All right, so if you are looking at implementing ArcLight at your institution, some things to expect. There's a lot out of the box that you get just being a Blacklight app. Facets are amazing for archival data, auto-suggest. This is our first Blacklight app that we're using keyword highlighting, and it's really sweet on these finding aids. The Bootstrap layout is a joy to work with. You know, I showed a lot of the Blacklight gems and the APIs that we're able to use. It's just an awesome ecosystem to tap into to develop an application around. There are some challenges. So it's less than a version 1.0. So there are some undercooked areas in the application. The documentation is pretty sparse. The relevance rank is not great out of the box. You really have to kind of roll your own configuration. We did encounter a lot of indexing errors when we first started going. There's EAD as a wide and it's sprawling standard. There's a lot of tags in EAD that are not currently going to display or index the way you probably should. So there's a lot of that kind of thing, but overall, it's just been a joy to use and we're really happy with it. So next for us, we want to get some of our modifications upstream in ArcLight Core. We're not quite sure what the community would want of what we've got so far. So that's hopefully a discussion that we can kick off this week. We did have a single page view feature that we were not able to complete. Our stakeholders have not necessarily been adamantly clamoring for it now, but we are interested in still doing that and wonder if that might be a community kind of thing. And speaking of community, we really want to help grow the ArcLight community. We want to help the next implementers and just be as involved as we can. We're just really pleased with it so far and want to help other people get to the spot where we are. So that's all I have, and thanks.
Thanks, Sean, so much. Up next from Indiana University, it's Julie Hardesty. Do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and share your screen, Julie?
Hi, yeah, this is Julie. Let me share the screen that I want to share. And is that presenting the slides? Yes, great. All right. So yeah, my name's Julie Hardesty. I'm a metadata analyst at Indiana University Libraries, and along with Randall Floyd, lead programmer analyst at Indiana University Libraries, we want to share with you some broad strokes about our implementation of ArcLight at IU. And you'll see that we are a bit more out of the box than what Duke University is at this point. There we go. So we are coming from a finding aid service that, while it's based on the open source XTF software from the California Digital Library, is about 15 years old. So we've been using it for what we've had for a long time. It also relies on a homegrown JavaScript application for publishing finding aids, and has required EAD XML with no way to create that XML other than hand encoding in a text editor like Oxygen. So it's a service that has worked for the Bloomington campus, where there are specialized archivists and special collections staff who can learn and encode in EAD. But this isn't a realistic expectation to allow this service to be available across all of our campuses with very different staffing and departmental structures. So IU recently celebrated 200 years as a university, and as part of that, the IU Office of the Bicentennial provided funding for us to expand the Archives Online service to be system-wide across all the campuses at IU. So in order for finding aids to be publishable system-wide, we really needed something like ArchivesSpace that makes finding aid creation and management into an easier and less specialized technical task. What we were doing was not just implementing ArcLight, but also implementing ArchivesSpace at IU. That all happened kind of at once. So an ArchivesSpace has a public user interface for any finding aids created and stored there. And we looked at it, but IU already uses Blacklight for many other system-wide services that we have, including our online library catalog, IUCat. and other digital collection services such as Pages Online that make use of the Samvera software stack that includes Blacklight. And the archive space public user interface would be a completely new system for our libraries technologies team in charge of the service to learn and support. So ArcLight seemed to be a better fit for the end user experiences we already provide and for the technology direction we want our services to take. So providing things with Solr indexing, having common faceting, providing cross-collection searching, that sort of thing. In addition, ArcLight is still EAD centered, and Sean talked about that a little bit. It indexes EAD XML files into its Solr index. So it's already, it's still standards based, and we could see a path with that to migrate the EAD content that we already have. And ArcLight's ability to incorporate a IIIF enabled viewer like the Universal Viewer, which we're showing here in Pages Online, also moves us closer with our other digital collection services and gives us a better platform to offer a variety of archival digitized content. So not just paged content, but single images, audio, video, eventually even 3D digitized content. So next up, I'm just going to show a little bit about the workflow that we have from ArchivesSpace to ArcLight as it stands today. So we start by creating resources in ArchivesSpace that are then automatically exported as EAD 2002 and exposed in what we are calling a middleware step. From there, the server hosting ArcLight is watching that exposed EAD for updates and uses that source for updating ArcLight, the ArcLight index. And this work was started by folks at Notch 8, who contracted with us at IU to start this IU specific work for implementing ArcLight. So this isn't part of any of the community ArcLight work, but we needed it in place at IU in order to have a functioning production system at IU that could go between ArchivesSpace and ArcLight. So we're still working through issues of normalizing, mapping, and formatting, along with reporting errors from this indexing process. But for the most part, we are actively publishing and updating all of our finding aids now from ArchivesSpace to ArcLight. Notch 8 also helped us participate in the community sprint work that happened in fall 2019 that Sean talked about. They contracted with us on behalf of IU to participate in that sprint. And our IU implementation is actually going much more out of the box with ArcLight than what Duke has done. So Notch 8 implemented some IU branding for us, and we're making use of the repositories page as our home page. But other than that, we haven't really fundamentally modified much else about what ArcLight is doing at this point. We're currently working to move to a containerized system using Podman. So we're moving away from Docker, and we think that'll help us achieve a more manageable long-term server setup for this service. And we also benefited a lot from Duke going live first, because Notch 8 finished their work and we were actively setting up our production system and testing right as Duke announced that they were live. So Sean and his team helped us get past pain points that they had already figured out, and we really want to thank them for that. That was super great. So community definitely has its benefits for sure. So here are some screenshots of the basic parts of our ArcLight implementation. And so some of the things that you saw that Duke modified, you will see that we are still currently using. Our homepage, as I said, is the ArcLight repositories page, and we've added some introductory content above the repository listing. And here's a view of search results. This one stemming from entering a particular repository and viewing all of the collections that are in that repository. So it's technically a search result, but there's no actual search that was conducted using the search box. This is a collection overview page for a single finding aid, and this largely sticks with ArcLight out of the box using the indented tree structure and the tabbed interface that is supplied. And the collection context tab shows the component list from the finding aid and includes expandable and collapsible capabilities for longer hierarchical component lists. And the access tab provides any usage restrictions or access restrictions for the entire collection and the current component being viewed, along with contact information for the holding repository. So we do have that tabbed interface at this point, but I think we're open to potentially looking at what that interface is doing in the future. And the work is continuing. At this point, we don't have digital items available in our implementation of ArcLight yet. But we will be implementing the Universal Viewer as a IIIF enabled viewer for the digitized content we already have for our current finding aid collections and for newly generated digitized content. And the current digitized content we have is all in the form of folders of paged content. So it's multiple items, each with multiple pages that need to be shown in a single view. And we're also working on improvements to that middleware indexing process that we've got in place to log failures and provide better reporting. And there's the list of bugs, as Sean kind of alluded to, that always comes up in a new system setup like this. Some things are local fixes, such as how downloads work for print versions of finding aids from our setup. And then some are community bugs. Some of the things that Sean was talking about are things that we're interested in looking at too, like adding the EAD elements to the finding aid view that don't currently display. So that's the update that we wanted, the implementation that we wanted to show. So thank you again to the ArcLight community for coming together and pushing this forward. We would definitely not be this far along if it weren't for the community. So thank you very much. We'll stop sharing.
Thanks, Julie. That was great. And then up next, we've got Trey Pendragon from Princeton University. Trey, you want to take it away?
Yeah, I can do that. Everybody see that okay?
Yeah.
Great. Let's see how many branded slide decks we can bring up. So I'm Trey Pendragon. I'm here to talk a little bit about what we call POFA Lite, which is ArcLight at Princeton. It's an ongoing project, so I'm going to give a little bit of history, some of the customizations that we've made, and some of the things that we're actively working on right now. All right, so our existing implementation is called findingaids.princeton.edu. Some of you may have seen it. It is powered by an SVN repository of EAD files that are shoved into ExistDB, and a bunch of XSLT is run across it. It's a lot of acronyms. Long story short, very few of us know how to use it. And our team has definitely changed the technical stacks that we work on, and this infrastructure has turned out to be a little bit fragile for us. So we were looking for a new solution. So a lot of that motivation was, let's go into a new, more reliable infrastructure. We already have pretty much every other Blacklight possible thing, and we know how to work on those things. So ArcLight looked like a great solution for us. We did also decide to move to ArchivesSpace at the same time for a variety of reasons, which is going okay, has its own set of difficulties, obviously. And there are also long-standing requests for improvements on our old site that we just couldn't do for a variety of reasons, whether that was improving the search results, faster rendering of like outrageously long finding aids, as well as improving requests so that you could request material in multiple pages. We had a few workarounds that involved like show every component so that I can submit one request. That just wasn't really working out in our tests. So the remainder of this is largely going to be kind of the customizations that we've done. I hoped, and it turned out to be true, that the presentations before me would show you what ArcLight looks like in a variety of other contexts. What we found when we started this project was that we spun up the base ArcLight. Our stakeholders are really involved, and I'm very happy that that's the case. And they looked around and they said, well, this is okay, but we need this, and this is okay, but we need this, and this is how it works in the old site, and this is why it works this way in the old site. So we went through a pretty extensive set of wireframes to kind of scope out the features that they really needed that were different than what existed. I'm going to go over a number of those here, but long story short, we went into this project and really wanted them to say, these, like, just imagine, you know, just do the best you can do. So this is one of those wireframes. If people want links to all of the wireframes, we're happy to share those. One of the first customizations we did was the homepage. We had discovered in the past that really people just want a really big search bar. So we put a really big search bar in there, included information about hours and things about how to request materials. We have plans in the future to do featured online content and blogs, more things like curated material that would show up on the page. But we didn't want to do it immediately, both because that's more future work and because somebody would have to be defined as the person to actually curate that material. One of the big things that we're always working on is the table of contents. So base ArcLight, you get this collection context button that worked pretty okay, but it was really important to our stakeholders that I always know exactly where I am in an EAD. And I know how that relates to other steps, and I know how much deeper I can go, and I can make sure that I'm requesting the exact level that I need to request for digitization nowadays, or for access in the past. We went through a few iterations here. It turns out performance is pretty difficult when you have these really large EADs, and accessibility is difficult in a number of open source table of contents type widgets, but we think we've nailed it down. Another important feature which has evolved from our previous request method is we use Aeon to request materials out of finding aids, but we really wanted people to be able to request material from a variety of places and then decide at one point, all right, request all of this stuff that might be in from various places. So we added this request cart concept. In various places, there's things like request this box you can see in the bottom left-hand corner there, or request content, and that adds it to a cart as if you're on Amazon, pops out a little thing. We haven't quite user tested those UI elements to make sure that people understand that they're not purchasing this material, but we have high hopes. And this is still work that is ongoing and has required some significant customization, both in indexing as well as in ArchivesSpace's EAD export. Regarding customizations around indexing, I am heartened to hear that my colleagues here have done significant indexing updates because we have largely redone all of the indexing. We've changed the structure so that containers have containers rather than a collection has a bunch of components. There's a lot more fields that we turned out to need to index. We had to fix some indexing for how data comes out of ArchivesSpace for our material, as well as bring in things like location codes for containers and so on and so forth that we had to customize out of ArchivesSpace's EAD. I didn't add a slide for this, but I did want to mention our current plan is that we're going to export EADs via customized EAD export plugin in ArchivesSpace and pump those right into ArcLight. We'll see how that goes. That's largely it. There are a number of other customizations. This work is ongoing. Somebody tells me that our resources are finally in our ArchivesSpace instance. We'll see if that's true. If there are any questions about any of this material, this is how you can get a hold of me, or we're about to enter our questions section now.
Thanks, Trey. So yeah, we have about 15 minutes open for questions and discussion from attendees, and if panelists have questions for each other. So you can raise your hand to be unmuted. We're in a Zoom meeting, so you can definitely just chat with people directly, or you can also chat your questions in, and I'll read them aloud to the panelists. It looks like, Jonathan, you've got a question. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I think several of the panelists talked about doing pretty extensive customizations and additional work on top of ArcLight. So I'm curious if anyone considered, sort of starting with ArcLight as a starting point, but not continuing to use it, kind of forking off or taking the parts you wanted, or if you consider that, or what you think the benefit of staying on ArcLight, even when you have to do such extensive customizations is.
I guess from our perspective at Duke, it seems like we did a lot of interface customization where we might have overridden some, overrode some helpers here and there, and definitely the sort of the look of the site. Although we kept a lot of it intact, like the JavaScript for us that powers the component view tree thing, we kept that's intact, but we just sort of moved it and made it look different. So from those perspectives, I think we definitely did a lot of customizing, but we tried to really make sure it was something we needed to customize. And then we also tried to only customize the pieces of it that we knew we needed to customize. I think one thing that's happened with our digital repository platform, it really over time, the more you're sort of just customizing and overwriting things, it just becomes this bespoke application that bears little resemblance to, is just so far afield from the core platform. We want to be careful not to replicate that with ArcLight. And we're also looking at ArcLight. For us at Duke, we haven't done a lot of community contributing to projects like this, and that's something we want to change. We want to be more involved in getting things that we're working on upstream and work more within the community to try to figure out common solutions to things. And we felt that if we just started from scratch with something, we'd kind of lose sight of that goal.
For us at IU, we were really wanting, we needed to have a community effort to try and get ArcLight to a point where we could use it, because we did not have the capacity on our own to do that work in the time frame that we needed to do it. So being able to participate in that community sprint and get ArcLight to a point where we could use it like that, there are customizations that we're interested in on making changes to ArcLight from what it is now. But I think what it is now is definitely something that we can use, and we are using it at this point. So I think it was because of the community that we were able to even do that. So.
I think this is a good question and a hard one to answer, but what I will say is that at least for us, this implementation was a great way to collaborate with colleagues, as well as a great starting point, especially regarding indexing and what we imagine navigation to look like and things like that. And it's important to realize that we're talking about what's probably the first few implementations. And I think we're already seeing a few features that are being implemented in all those places. And hopefully now that we're working on some level of common platform, we can bring those into the core in a good way. But it's always hard to balance that desire to customize for your patrons versus the burden of development.
Julia, there was a question for you about if you received any pushback across the IU system regarding the updates.
This was, it was an interesting process for us because the Bloomington campus had that system set up with that homegrown JavaScript app for publishing E80 XML files and getting them into the XTF site that we've been using. And we'd actually looked at archive space previously. We looked at like back when there was Archon and Archivist Toolkit. We'd been watching all of those developments, but the system that we had was working for the needs that we had at the time, being focused on the Bloomington campus and the capabilities that were there with people on campus. So we never got ourselves to the point of saying that we needed to make that change and make that move until we got this opportunity to say, can we do something that is going to be system-wide, that's going to work for all the campuses that we have across the state, not just Bloomington. And there's like 8 campuses, I think. But not all 8 campuses have an archivist. You know, not all 8 campuses have special collections people, and there's some people are doing that as part of like, you know, 500 other jobs that they're doing. So if we did that, we had to have something like archive space. And so once we realized we needed to do that and make a system-wide setup, it wasn't difficult to get us into that, oh, we need archive space now mode. And then once we did that, looking at ArcLight, it ended up being like I said, what I talked through with our discussion of the archive space public user interface versus ArcLight, and talking with collection managers and showing them both and saying, we've got the experience to work in this blacklight based software, and, you know, does this work for you? And essentially they were okay with that as well. So that's kind of how it ended up playing out.
Then Nikitas had a question about the JSON API that Sean mentioned. Is there something custom about the ArcLight one, or is it the same as the Blacklight 7 one?
Sure, I can answer that. So the for getting search results, that is the Blacklight 7 out of the box, which we hadn't realized, but is very different from the Blacklight 6 one that we were accustomed to. So it was just more of a learning thing. But no, that's out of the box. In terms of the JSON API for getting metadata from a particular component, that's kind of broken out of the box in ArcLight, but I was able to look at Princeton's GitHub and see how they patched that and just borrow their code. So thanks, Trey. Yeah, there's sort of an open bug for that on ArcLight. But yeah, it's more or less out of the box.
And then I think the next question is, and I don't know if any of y'all can speak to this, is are there any more community sprints planned for ArcLight?
I believe the community in a general sense has the desire for future community sprints, but as far as I know, we don't have anything that's like on the calendar. Does that seem right?
I think that's true.
Yeah, nothing I've heard of.
Is there a particular group of people that are like organizing those sprints, or is it just also kind of community led at this point? I know Stanford was mostly the leaders of the initial one, but.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if we, yeah, Stanford was leading this initial, the community sprint that happened in the fall. But you know, it seems like a good question about how a future community sprint might be shaped and who might lead that, if Stanford would need to, or if we've got another way to do it. I'm not exactly sure. Yeah.
Trey, I saw you chatted a question. Was that
Yeah,
to the whole group? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just ask it. So we've got 3 different implementations of ArcLight here on archive space even, that all index differently. I sort of wonder if you could just speak to your reasoning about why you chose the way you did.
Yeah, I could go first, and my colleague Noah, if you're on the call, if you could help too, if I say any of this incorrectly. But I think we have some steps that are, well, we've mostly automated through this process. We do have some steps that rely on really customized scripts and post transformations that happen on the way between our ASpace and ArcLight that play into why we ended up with the workflow we did. I'm not sure. We looked briefly at other potential tools for getting from ASpace to ArcLight, and I can't remember exactly the reasons why they didn't work. I think a lot of it is every institution has their own EAD kind of practices or the ways that they use ASpace, and there's a lot of custom stuff just that goes into that. That's hard to standardize on.
Yeah, for IU, I think Randall might be on here as well if he needs to chime in for details on this. But for IU, we had this concept. We actually had, with the homegrown system we had in place previously for publishing EAD XML, we kind of ended up with some expectations coming in from collection managers that they would have a system that would be easy to put something in a certain place and it's going to be published, and it just is going to be grabbed. It's overnight. It's automatic. And we actually wanted to improve on that to allow for more immediate publishing instead of having to wait for an overnight process. That was kind of one of the things that we were like, if we're going to do this and make the switch, we need to make that improvement. So that was one of the things that sent us down the route that we took to get that middleware step set up, because we are constantly, the system, ArcLight is constantly watching for EAD file updates that from the export from ArchivesSpace, and is offering those up for repository managers to actually go and manually update on ArcLight if they want to. They can choose to just kind of do that immediately, or we have kind of a twice a day update that happens for any individual file updates. And then I think once a week, we're actually exporting everything from for each repository as a zip file from ArchivesSpace. And once a week, the index is completely rebuilt based on that, which also allows us a way to remove finding aids from ArcLight if they need to be removed, since it's kind of wiping out the whole thing and rebuilding it. So that's better than what we had before. And so we're actually really happy that we got that in place.
Jonathan asked if I was talking about the pipeline to get exports in ArchivesSpace or the indexing rules, and I did mean the pipeline. And I appreciate both of those answers. All I can say for Princeton is we just got ArchivesSpace, so we're sort of hoping that this, it's gonna tell us when things have changed, and we'll be able to check periodically. But it's good to hear that maybe that wasn't the case for y'all. So we'll keep our eyes out.
Any other questions before we wrap up at this part at 4?
Next question. Could any of you describe the steps you went through for accessibility testing, and briefly like what the improvements you made were?
I can speak to that. We took an entire 2-week sprint to work on accessibility. We used the Axe tool. There's a Chrome plugin that's really nice. We did not use it as a sort of in our CI process. They definitely revealed a lot of problems. I wouldn't say a lot, actually. There are several problems that are part of the Blacklight version that the current version of ArcLight is pinned to, that have since been addressed in Blacklight in newer versions. So things like ARIA attributes on icons and things like that. We were able to do local patching to get it to a point where we don't see any violations now when we run X on the UI. I'll be happy to share a link to spots in our GitHub or GitLab repo that show where we're doing those patches.
We have some staff members who are trained for this kind of thing, and we've had them go through, especially for things like the table of contents. We do have larger plans, especially around when we actually release, to do a broader manual accessibility test of the material, as well as there are open tickets for things like Axe matchers to implement in CI, but I'm not sure if we're going to get there before our release expectations or not, for at least the automated portion of it.
Well, we're at 4, so I want to make sure we keep on time for the next session, which is solve your search quality issues by putting relevance at the center of Blacklight. I want to also thank Sean and Julie and Trey so much for demonstrating your Blacklight or ArcLight implementations. So thanks so much, but definitely if there's more questions, please, I'm sure any of them would be happy to be reached out offline or via the Slack channel. Thank you all so much.